Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Sweet Nothings podcast. If you're new here, my name is Kelly. I'm here to whisper sweet nothings in your ear. This is your home of, or even perhaps your new home, of relaxed, funny, and informative chats about the love of eating. We'll talk about the latest food trends, controversial opinions, and all things edible. I'm very happy today to welcome you to episode 10 of this here podcast that is always a wonderfully and joyously ramshackle affair. But the sun is screaming down here today in Italy, and I'm in a fantastic mood to bring you some daft content as always. I want to thank you all for, even if you're brand new here, for listening ahead of time, not just at the end of the podcast, because I've been so happy to see it perform as it has so far, and I've received some truly and bloody lovely messages from some of you on Twitter and Instagram, via email, for all sorts of reasons, for just enjoying listening, for finding it relaxing, for finding it, a bit different to the usual kind of alpha males berating women on the internet. And also because some of you have found some of the episodes either meaningful or helpful towards your continuing recovery from disordered eating. And that, I'd say, it warms my heart. It overfills my heart with joy. So thank you so much to anyone who's gotten in touch or to anyone who's listening for whatever reason. You're all bloody gems. Anyway, shall we get into the subject matter of today's episode, which I am very happy to tell you is going to be the weirdest things we've ever eaten. But before we get into that, I want to touch upon some of the wonderfully daft food news of the month. In terms of food trends, we really haven't seen much. It has been, understandably, an incredibly heavy month of news, and silly updates in the world of food are few and far between with everything else that is going on in Europe and around the world at the moment. So understandably, we don't have much Colin the Caterpillar cake drama to bring you, or any festive nonsense just yet. Perhaps next month I'll have some truly stupid Easter related content to bring you, but March has been a month of more important news and little space for silly trends. In terms of things that have popped their head out at me over the past few days though, I have seen some truly bizarre things, which is one of the inspirations behind this month's episode subject matter. People of the UK may be happy to hear, for example, that the Cadbury Twirl is now available in a kind of crunchy mint flavour in B&M stores. This, I believe, is an Australian-made kind of Cadbury Twirl product, because South Africa, India and Australia, let alone Ireland, have just exponentially better Cadbury options than the country that created Cadbury has, which, is just endlessly disappointing, but I digress. And I believe at the moment B&M is the only place to find this Twirl breakaway in mint flavour, but chocolate and mint, or just any kind of Cadbury Twirl is your thing, you may want to go and pick it up. It's one I've never seen before, but I might see if I can snaffle some online just to try them out. But on the matter of slightly weirder foods, I personally am very happy to see that Hellmann's, the kind of world-renowned, I believe, or at least continentally renowned mayonnaise producer, have decided to release in the UK a gravy-flavoured mayonnaise. This is fantastic news, in my opinion. Granted, I have not tasted it yet because I don't believe it's actually available in stores until a couple of weeks' time or this time next month, but a gravy-flavoured mayonnaise is something that I truly don't think could make anything taste worse. And in fact, I may be of the opinion that all mayonnaise would taste better if it had some kind of gravy component inside it, speaking from a Scottish perspective. Having lived in Italy for about 5 months now, I've yet to convert people here to the unabashed joy of gravy, but I'm working on it slowly. And thirdly, because I follow a few kind of food news outlets in Canada, I was gratefully or disturbingly, I'm not sure, informed of a peanut butter and jelly, or peanut butter and jam, flavoured mac and cheese available at Disney World. I am led to believe this is only available at the Disney parks in California. I've never been to the United States, let alone Disney, so don't ask me which parts, I don't know. But this is supposedly a peanut butter and jelly, or peanut butter and jam, macaroni cheese with brown sugar crumble and strawberry popping candy on top. I like to think I'm a girl with an open mind, but it seems like one of these food combinations that is just inexcusable, and only for those with absolutely nothing better to eat in the house. Almost to the point that it's worthy of respect for its creativity, but it's one I won't be whipping up at home to taste. But aside from that, as I've touched upon, there has been quite little in terms of food trends and food news on social media this month. Whether we shall see some more things creeping up in time for Easter and other kind of springtime celebrations as the weather warms up and we begin to discard our winter skins, we shall see. But at the moment, as usual, March is a fairly calm month in terms of food. But thanks to the inspiration both of the gravy mayonnaise and of the peanut butter popping candy brown sugar crumble mac and cheese, I would very, very much like to delve into, in this episode, the weirdest foods we have ever eaten. Now, I asked all of you lovely people over on Instagram and on YouTube. If you are not following along, you can find me at Maverick Baking on both platforms, on all social media platforms, essentially. And I regularly ask kind of questions there related to the podcast and to other things. And of course, where you can see the other content I make in terms of recipes and videos and food reviews. But I asked you on Instagram and YouTube to provide me with the weirdest foods you have ever eaten. Now, I didn't get specific. I didn't necessarily mean anything disgusting, anything radical, anything completely out of left field, just the weirdest thing that you have eaten. And we found ourselves in a hilarious spot between some responses that were so normal, I wasn't sure whether they should even be considered, and some which were so bizarre that I may actually have to insert a short trigger warning here if you're not into insects and unusual animal parts. So before getting into the weirdest things I have ever eaten, which I will touch on towards the end of the episode, you all provided such a delicious and disturbing range of answers that I would just love to go through these right now. And I plan to do so going from kind of most normal to most bizarre. It's probably the best way to word it. One of the best answers I received, though, is just one that I have to read out first. I received this as a YouTube comment, and the storytelling and the descriptions here are a perfect place to start. Let me just get you in the zone here. My sister's attempt at coffee and walnut cupcakes. I was present for the end of the cake making process. She put in the suggested amount of coffee, and yet it tasted only of the faintest flavour. The icing was oddly crumbly and hard, with an overpowering buttery flavour. The cakes themselves were flat and had strange, sticky, shiny tops and a texture that could only be described as chalky. I don't know how she could have ruined a trusty Mary Berry recipe. She is definitely an interesting cook. Shout out to this person's sister, because not only do those cakes sound adventurous in the mistakes that were made, but the storytelling process here has actually made me want to taste them just because of how you've worded that. But ultimately, a kind of dodgy attempt at coffee and walnut cupcakes. Is it something weird to have eaten? Probably, yeah, but we're about to get a hell of a lot weirder. Someone else responded by telling me they had eaten hummus with Doritos. Now, this one doesn't seem that weird to me. That is absolutely something I have consumed at some point in my life. Knowingly or unknowingly, hummus and Doritos are delicious separately and absolutely delicious together. In fact, Doritos are kind of designed for the perfect shape of dipping into hummus. It might be a little bit oily altogether or a little bit too salty altogether, but banging. A banging and probably universally acceptable combination, I would say. We had another response of someone saying that one of the weirdest things they've ever eaten is hot Weetabix. Weetabix, if you are outside of the UK, is a kind of wheat-based cereal that's compressed into these kind of crunchy oblong pieces. Typically, you would have 2 to 4 in a bowl covered with cold milk. I'm not a huge fan. They taste like prison food to me, having not been to prison, but, you know, the imagination runs wild. And I have heard before of people eating it hot, as in either pouring just hot milk over the top or heating the Weetabix with cold milk in the microwave to make it hot. Honestly, it just sounds like a kind of more disgusting way to make porridge. And being someone from the country that invented and still continues to eat porridge, it doesn't sound too terrible to me. A bit weird in terms of like UK societal norms, but definitely nothing too crazy. A couple of sandwich options were put forward as something weird. Someone said they had eaten a weird cheese and pineapple sandwich, and someone else putting forward the oddness of a peanut butter and dill pickle or peanut butter and gherkin sandwich. Honestly, both of these I would eat. I haven't, but I absolutely would eat. Cheese and pineapple, though any Italian listeners might be, you know, bursting a gasket at the thought of the kind of cheese and pineapple combination, much like the pizza and pineapple combination is controversial. It's that whole kind of salty and creamy with sweet and juicy. It works. We know it works, even if we don't all like it. Similarly with the peanut butter and gherkin sandwich type thing. I'm a big gherkin lover. I love super sour, salty foods, and I love peanut butter. I think both of those sandwiches, yes, weird. Yes, not the kind you would bring in to work on the first day if you didn't expect some abuse of your lunchbox, but definitely not the most disgusting thing I've heard. Someone else stated the weirdest thing they've probably eaten is mayonnaise straight from the jar. Definitely not something I've done myself. Mayonnaise is one of those foods that, apart from the gravy mayonnaise I mentioned, which I'm already a fan of without tasting it, mayonnaise is one of those foods that sort of always dances the line between marvelous and utterly abhorrent. Like, a little bit is absolutely essential in some sandwiches, not only for lubrication, but for a little bit of flavour, for a little bit of creaminess. But there's something about when there's just a bit too much mayonnaise, or when you see mayonnaise start to kind of sit out in a warm room for too long, that I can totally understand why this would be a very weird thing to eat raw, neat, straight, like a sip of Scotch whiskey. Yeah, that's not one for me. I had someone else drop in that they once ate macaroni and cheese, which they had made with too much turmeric. Now, the interesting part to me is the fact that you added turmeric to mac and cheese whatsoever, unless it was one of the vegan recipes in which I think people sometimes use turmeric if for nothing else but a bit of the kind of iconic yellow colour that a proper mac and cheese would have. But yeah, turmeric's not a spice that should be played with for colour or for flavour unless you know what you're doing, especially with cheese. That's a no from me. We had not one but 2 answers related to biryani. One person had eaten a jackfruit biryani, which honestly sounds delicious. Jackfruit, if you haven't had it, is a kind of, I believe you can either eat it underripe to be used as a kind of bland substitute for meat, or when it is ripe, it's just a sweet kind of tropical fruit. You occasionally, if you move in vegetarian and vegan circles, see kind of jackfruit pulled pork or jackfruit burgers, jackfruit chili con carne or chili sin carne, I should say. But it's one of those things that's becoming a bit more accepted. So a jackfruit biryani doesn't sound too bad at all. However, someone else commented that they had eaten biryani with kheer. Now, I had to Google kheer to be absolutely confident, but kheer, I believe, is a South Asian sweet, creamy rice pudding dessert type thing. Essentially not really something you would mix with biryani. I don't know if it was a particular kind of slightly sweetly spiced biryani, but if there was meat in there, yeah. First of all, that's a lot of rice, but you could have just eaten them separately. A couple of people, unsurprisingly, put forward that the weirdest food they had ever eaten was haggis. Haggis is the national food of my homeland of Scotland, if you're unfamiliar with it. I believe it's a kind of mashed up combination of sheep's innards with spices, fats, and grains. It sounds and looks truly terrible, like truly something you would not want to ingest, but I assure you it is delicious. It's cozy, it's spicy, it's meaty, it's so filling and satisfying that you can definitely see how our constantly whiskey or beer drunk ancestors got hooked on the stuff, you know? It's a kind of peasant food, a farmer food. Definitely not the kind of thing you would travel the world just to taste, but is definitely worth tasting at least once, in my opinion. I was told by a few people that they had tasted in France both snails, perhaps unsurprisingly, and duck foot. Now, duck foot is a bit unusual. Duck leg, definitely more common, but honestly, with the amount of butter that the French use in their cooking, I would trust them to make just about anything taste delicious. If you're French and listening, I mean that entirely as a compliment. Someone commented that a kind of traditional Eastern European meat-based jelly was one of the weirdest things they'd ever eaten. I believe in British culture, we had a lot of meat-based jellies back in the kind of 60s and 70s. They were used as centerpieces, and it was often gravy or stock and vegetables and boiled meat encased in aspic jelly. They look horrendous and they probably taste even worse. If it's anything like that, it's not something I'd go for, but perhaps if it's traditional, it's something that reminds you of home, perhaps it is tasty. Perhaps it's a good way of using up meat in a way that's a bit more economical. I'm not really sure, but definitely a bit weird for some of us. A couple of very creative dessert options came up from some lovely answerers. One includes brownies with prunes inside. This just sounds like something that you would be given by an old person who doesn't quite use the bathroom as much as they would like to, and they need to add fibre into their diet because, while I don't dislike prunes, no brownie would ever be improved by prunes, you know? Just like I have absolutely no issue with raisins, but there are an arm's length list of ingredients that would be better than prunes to include in a brownie or any dessert for that matter. Another fantastic one, which could be a Portuguese thing. If you are listening from Portugal or you have any ties to Portugal, do let me know. Fresh orange juice, like freshly squeezed pulp and all, mixed with like bashed up, broken up biscuits, like sweet biscuits, like cookies. Sounds a bit unusual to me. Might be, you know, a very kind of Western, Southern European thing. Probably delicious when it's hot outside and there's absolutely no need to bake anything for dessert. I don't know, definitely a different one. And this was also followed by a similar citrusy response of orange slices drizzled with olive oil, some flaky sea salt, and finely chopped garlic. This is less of a kind of dessert, but more of just, you know, a side dish or a snack, I believe. And while it's definitely not something I've tasted, I can see how it works. I can see how garlic and orange are kind of strong enough to hang out with one another, and how olive oil and sea salt could both perk up and mellow out all of the flavors. It's probably not the first dish many of us would think of when preparing a snack, but it's one I would definitely give a bash to. Someone informed me that they had eaten a chocolate-stuffed ravioli with a white chocolate sauce, which doesn't sound bad, but apparently it did taste bad. Sweet pasta's never been one for me. There's just so many other better ways to consume sweet dough-based desserts, I think, so I can see how this could get very sickly and rich very fast. Someone else had tried a kind of flat fried donut with Nutella and feta cheese. Again, not my first idea for something to try, but it's one I would probably take a big hunking bite out of, just out of curiosity. The kind of sweet nuttiness of Nutella balanced out with the super salty, creamy feta cheese. And just about anything goes well with fried food, so I'd probably imagine the donut was just a vehicle for these ingredients rather than a major component in terms of flavour. But I'm weirdly not angry about this one. Hilariously, more than one person responded by telling me that they had tasted their dog's food, or their dog's biscuits, or their cat's food and their cat's biscuits. This one I completely understand. Sometimes curiosity just gets the better of us, and some of the adverts or even the marketing on the packaging of dog food and cat food and dog biscuits is just, it's weirdly alluring. You know, they'll be like, oh, hunky chunks of roast beef and gravy and there's carrots in it, and you're just looking at it thinking it doesn't look that different to either your granny's cooking or your school dinners, so why not just taste it? It's something I've never done. I've never tasted any dog or cat food or cat biscuits or dog biscuits, but I can truly and unashamedly understand why you would do this. But at this point, we move from the kind of understandable and a bit peculiar things into what is pretty much the properly bizarre food combinations or challenging cultural dishes, shall we say. We begin with durian, or durian. I'm not really sure the proper anglicized way to say it, but that East Asian fruit that apparently smells a bit like vomit, but tastes very good when it's ripe. It's actually illegal in some places in the world, I believe, and is not something that is commonly imported into other places because of the smell and the controversy surrounding the fruit. But I think if you've ever traveled to Far East Asia, it's something that you may come across quite readily in street food markets or thereabout. And it's almost a bit of a tourist attraction of itself just because of how divisive the flavour is. Similarly, lots of answers related to insects. Deep-fried crickets, deep-fried grasshoppers, which are apparently just crunchy and salty and not too bad once you kind of get your head around what it is that you're eating. Someone had even tasted grasshopper tacos, which, if you're going to serve me anything weird, a taco is probably a fantastic way of doing so. The insect thing doesn't bother me too much as long as they're not still alive and hopping and flying around, and as long as they're well cooked and seasoned. So many cultures around the world eat these readily and happily because it's a very accessible, affordable and available food source, and apparently a healthy source of protein. So I can see why you would be quite open to trying these, even though they are unusual to many other parts of the world. Someone has even tasted dried stingray fin. Very specific, sounds very Scandinavian. I know that kind of dried and fermented shark and whale meat is quite common as you get further north in the world, which again is mostly just a product of the environment that many people grew up in, much like haggis is to my ancestors. So while it's not top of my shopping list for next week, it's it's an understandable essential to some cultures. Some just straight up weird food combinations came in with salt and vinegar. Salt and vinegar hula hoop crisps dunked into Cadbury cream eggs. Now, I don't know if this person was high. I don't know if this person was in the depths of their deepest pregnancy cravings, but hula hoops, in case you don't know, are a kind of crisp, or chip, wherever in the world, whatever you call them. A crunchy, salty snack flavored with salt and vinegar that you would then dunk into the hyper sweet fondant center of a Cadbury's cream egg, which granted doesn't have much flavor other than just saccharine sugariness. But that combination is quite haunting. Even the sweet and sour vibes that this would give and the textural contrast. Why are you dipping anything into a Cadbury's cream egg? They're not even big. I don't even think they're big enough to dunk anything inside of. I appreciate your creativity in the realm of junk food, but it's one that if I saw you doing this in my house, I'd probably consider asking you to leave. Another deeply disturbing but interesting food combination someone had sampled was a tuna and banana sandwich. I'm guessing this was like tuna mayo, as in tinned tuna mixed with mayonnaise in a sandwich with, I don't know, mashed banana, sliced banana? Did you put the banana on top of the tuna, or was it mixed in with the tuna in place of mayonnaise? My head can't even figure out which of those would be less disgusting. And again, you could argue it's that kind of salty sweet combination that the human palate adores, but even in my even even when the budget is tight, I think I'd just rather eat the bread plain than get into that kind of malarkey. Someone has I can't even read this without smiling. Someone ate a Tesco fondant birthday cake with butter and jam. Your standard kind of Western birthday cake. Sponge with super sweet buttercream and berry jam. And they added jalapenos. Why is beyond me. Would I taste it if you put it in front of me? Honestly, probably yes. Is it still genuinely quite unhinged? Also yes. Absolutely yes. Because jalapenos do have their own flavour aside from the spice. And even though Tesco birthday cake probably is very bland, I feel like there's a lot of things you could have chosen to decorate and adorn it with that wasn't a jalapeno. But, you know, if you like spicy food, you've got to get that hit somewhere. But getting into the things that really did freak me out the most, live insects. Someone had tasted lemon ants. Live lemon ants. I'm not even going to allow my imagination to wander further. I completely appreciate it may be traditional in someone's culture, but it's just something that I'd rather go hungry than eat, to be honest. We continue on to sheephead. Something understandable. I can't really judge it because I have eaten sheep's innards on several occasions in the means of haggis. But sheep's head, I believe I've seen in stew or in soups elsewhere in the world. Probably quite tasty. The cheeks of many animals impart a lot of flavour because of the fat. Again, probably not top of the list of things to try. Recipes to bookmark, but I can see how this one came about. We follow this with insect eggs, which I've been informed are a kind of very old school and traditional affordable food in parts of Mexico, being cricket eggs and ant eggs. I imagine in a hot climate when money is scarce but insects are abundant, it's certainly something to eat. Certainly a source of nutrition, no matter how strong or weak your stomach may be. But apparently they taste like white corn, like corn. Again, maybe if I was in Mexico, I would go for it. I've sampled some strange foods in South America myself, and if they're traditional and people are continuing to eat it, either they're cheap enough that they're good enough, or they actually don't taste too bad. Someone else has ingested dried salted snake. This one honestly just feels like some kind of macho flex, like one of these predators that you want to eat just because you can. And honestly, most things dried and salted probably taste a bit better. Think of beef jerky or, salami. It's pretty much a decent way to prepare any kind of meat. So despite the fact I can't even picture what snake meat would actually look, feel, or taste like, I don't think I would need that much convincing to have this one. If it wasn't poisonous, of course. Some poor soul unknowingly ate either beef or sheep testicles. They weren't sure which, but they had been kind of lured into eating them by their husband, I believe, and I truly do feel for them because that is not, even if they did taste good, I imagine that texture was tragic. It sounds like something you would eat only as a challenge and nothing more. My condolences to that lovely commenter. Really, I feel for you. And the final weird food that one of you lovely listeners has tasted were larvae in a science class. Now, I don't know if this was something that you were being actively encouraged to do by whoever was conducting this class. Taste the larvae, children, or if this was something that you just wanted to taste because it was there, as many of us, especially as children, often do. There was no detail as to what kind of insect larva they were, but you know what? I don't think any answer would actually justify it or make it sound any more appealing. Thank you so much to everyone who dropped in their responses, though. I received way more than expected, and even the more normal ones were very entertaining. From those that are completely average or, non-disturbing, to things that are just downright weird combinations that came to you in the middle of the night when you were craving everything, to some properly challenging cultural dishes, both from my own country and from all corners of the world. Thank you for your responses. Just to add and finish off with the weirdest foods I have ever tasted, again, arranged in order of oddity. Haggis I had to add to my list because even though it's a very, very normal dish or even just ingredient, personally, being a Scottish person, haggis is a weird food. It looks weird. It feels weird. It sounds weird, but I can assure you it tastes delicious. As it is, in burgers, stuffed inside other meat, in sauces, in pies. My mouth is watering and also quite sad at the thought I can't have ready access to it here in Italy, but yeah, it's weird. I'll give you that. Speaking of Italy, one of the odd foods I have sampled while being here, thanks to a friend challenging me to do so, is the traditional northeastern Italian dish of nervetti, which is nerves, animal nerves. I believe they're either from a pig or from a cow that are prepared in jelly, and they'll often come in like cubes. So I was served them cold, set into cubes of this like pink, savoury, meaty jelly with the nerves just running through them. Again, it's a traditional kind of food of those less fortunate from history, and it's understandable because it's a source of protein, a good way to prepare the parts of an animal when you needed to feed a crowd in times when money was scarce, but would not recommend the taste or texture of those ever again by choice. But I can understand it's maybe one of those things that if your grandparents used to make it for you, or it's some kind of recipe that goes back a long time in your culture or just your family, I can see how these kind of things come about. But yeah, it's one I won't be touching again very soon. We move on to, as I briefly touched on earlier, some odd things that I tasted in South America. I visited Peru as a teenager. Beautiful, like stunningly beautiful country with such a diversity of food culture that I did not even have the chance to scrape the surface of. I was there on a kind of charity volunteering trip with a charity that was connected with the school I went to as a teenager. And we spent a lot of time in orphanages and kind of boys' homes, and therefore were treated to a lot of more, shall we say, traditional and more affordable foodstuffs that you wouldn't see in the more high-end Lima type restaurants, for example. The least weird of the three things I tasted was alligator. Definitely unusual for a girl from Scotland who's never seen an alligator in the flesh, fortunately. But much like the kind of dried salted snake, it was one of those things that when it was available as an option, there was some kind of apex predator vibe about wanting to eat this dinosaur-like beast that has probably eaten so many humans over the course of millennia, Just something very psychological about it. And honestly, they were served to us breaded and deep fried, which improves most things. And it tasted just like a meaty white fish. If you've ever tasted swordfish or any other kind of, slightly leaner white fish, that's very much what it was like. Would I rush back and say, you know, oh my God, I've missed alligator so much, I can't wait to taste it again? Probably not, but definitely not the worst thing I've ever tasted, though it is one of the weirdest. While in Peru, I also had the opportunity to taste alpaca. The best way to describe it was probably like a very, very lean cut of cheap beef. Think a slightly overcooked minute steak or skirt steak, a very, very lean cut that you would use very, very sparingly. We had very thin slices of this cooked alpaca, and at the time I was wrestling with altitude sickness, and just about any food was going to be good for my stomach in the end, but was not the most enjoyable to eat. So while I might not have been able to give it a fair judgment, it certainly didn't taste terrible. And finally, to close off our list of collective weirdest foods we've ever eaten, while in Peru, I had the chance to taste guinea pig. And it was served much like the alligator in the form of nuggets. It had been kind of breaded and fried. Certainly not the prettiest, and one of those dishes you kind of had to get your head over before tasting it, and was just very, very tough and chewy. Understandable how animals and dishes like that are, you know, prepared based on your geography. You and your ancestors would cook, prepare and eat whatever you could cook, prepare and eat, but definitely the weirdest and one of the most unpleasant things I've eaten. And I'll leave it at that for your judgment. This has to be one of the most fun podcast episodes I have prepared for, though essentially you guys did almost all of the work for me this time. It has been so much fun reading and for my own foodstuffs, remembering the weirdest things we've ever eaten. It was really enjoyable to read your responses and to imagine the tastes and textures and traditions behind all of these weird foodstuffs. I must kind of add, I mean, absolutely no offense in anything I may have critiqued in this episode. Of course, cultures vary so much from one country to another, even if they are neighbours. So I cannot profess to be any kind of expert in any of these foods. And something that is weird to me would be extremely normal to someone else. And something that is very normal to me would be incredibly weird to someone else. I've since learned, for example, something as simple as tea with milk, I have since learned is extremely unusual here in the Mediterranean. Whereas where I'm from, it is 5 times a day level of normal. But that is where I'm going to wrap it up for today's episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed this more kind of light-hearted installment compared to some from earlier this year or towards the end of last year, but it's one that I just felt kind of had to be touched upon at some point. As someone who talks about food almost all day, every day, talking about the weird is just as fun as talking about the wonderful. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this one as much as I have. I really appreciate you guys being here and listening as always. I hope March is treating you well so far, and I will see you for the next one. You're listening to the Sweet Nothings podcast. If you want to support the production, get access to exclusive foodie content and early access to podcast episodes, you can do so via Patreon. Just search for Sweet Nothings or Maverick Baking on Patreon, and thank you for everything.